Hello. Hello, everyone. How are
Hello.
you this afternoon? My name is Barbara Littles, and I want to welcome you to today's town hall, which is on mass incarceration among African American men in America and the effects that it has on our families. Today's town hall is sponsored by a Life for Life Urban Initiatives, and which is a grassroots organization founded in 2013 to help advocate for social justice. The organization is currently overseen by friends and family of wrongfully convicted juvenile lifer and Detroit native Robert Hines, charged with first-degree murder, premeditated murder, and possession of a felony firearm at the age of 17. Hines was convicted of both charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. With the help of supporters, after fighting with the Detroit Police Department and the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office for 4 years, Hines discovered a miscellaneous case file maintained by the Detroit Police Department. This case file contained exculpatory evidence that was wrongfully withheld from his state-appointed defense attorney during his trial in 2001. Within this miscellaneous case file, Hines discovered the existence of an overwhelming amount of evidence supporting his claims of his actual innocence, including witness statements, DNA evidence, and usable fingerprints. A Life for Urban Initiative has made its mission to create awareness about Robert Hines' case and other individuals who, like him, have been wrongfully incarcerated. We thank you for being here today. I'm Barbara Littles, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today for this town hall. And with that, we'd like to show you a short video so that you can get an understanding of how important this issue is.
Mass incarceration means that we've got a very high rate of incarceration historically, comparatively. And the other thing is the rate of incarceration is so high, so socially concentrated, that we're no longer incarcerating the individual, but we're incarcerating whole social groups. The rate of incarceration now is about 5 times higher than it was historically. Historically it was 100 per 100,000, now it's about 500 per 100,000. If we look at prison, if we add jail to that, it's about 700 per 100,000. Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men with very low levels of schooling. So if we think about black men who were born in the late 1970s and who are growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event. And that's really only happened in the last 10 years. We're at this point now where there's about 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. And that's about 1 in 9. The research shows that kids who experience parental incarceration have diminished school achievement, they have behavioural problems, depressive symptoms, acting out, and there's also evidence that these kinds of negative effects associated with parental incarceration are concentrated more among boys than among girls. And there's a very real risk here that incarceration becomes an inherited trait. The underlying issue is we've chosen prison as a way to respond to that problem of crime. And there are a whole variety of ways that we could have chosen to respond to that problem of crime. We've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty. And we've chosen the response of the deprivation of liberty for a historically aggrieved group whose liberty in the United States was never firmly established to begin with.
Wow. So I want to introduce to you our panelists today. We have a wonderful panel with a variety and vast amount of experience who are here to talk to us today about this issue of mass incarceration. We first have Tiffany Pruitt, And Tiffany Pruitt has 2 master's degrees. She has a master's degree in education, and she has a master's degree in educational leadership. And currently, right now, she serves as in 2020, she was appointed as the administrator in administrator's role of the supervisor of human resources and labor relations with Saginaw Public Schools, where she is now in charge of all of HR. She has had extensive experience with families and dealing with family issues and children. She has had won numerous awards and recognition, and she has most recently been featured by the Harvard Graduate School and has published a section in the book entitled Creating Safe, Equitable, Engaging Schools, a Comprehensive Evidence-Based Approach to Supporting Students, published by Harvard Education Press in 2018. Welcome to the panel, Ms. Pruitt.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Next, we have Carla D. Thomas, and Carla is homegrown. She was raised in Saginaw, Michigan, so she knows Saginaw, Michigan well. She is a U.S. Army veteran, and she also has a master's degree in marriage and family counseling, family therapy from Liberty University. She was determined to fulfill her dreams, and she knows what it's like to be in a community and try to empower people, and that's currently what she does through her Until Today counseling services. Welcome to the panel, Carla. And then we have Demetrius Titus, and Demetrius is the program associate of American Friends and Services Committee of the Michigan Criminal Justice Program. And in his role, he manages the Good Neighbor Project, which is restorative justice practices and principles. And he also works within the community in this area. Prior to working with AFSC, Demetrius was incarcerated for 18 years in Michigan Department of Corrections. And so he knows what it's like on both sides. And so he's invaluable to this discussion today. Currently, he serves as the executive director of a nonprofit Second Chance House, Hope House, and sits on the boards of Nation Outside and the Michigan Prison Dual Initiative. Welcome to the panel, Demetrius.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. And next, of course, we have Attorney Lamar. She is a native of Saginaw, Michigan also, and she received her bachelor's degree from Michigan State University, and she currently runs her own law firm, the Lamar Law Firm, PLLC, which she makes appearances in state and federal court. She currently works in the areas of criminal defense, bankruptcy, family law, and general litigation. And while practicing law, Attorney Lamar founded the legal nonprofit organization, Access to Bankruptcy for Low-Income Persons. We want to welcome you to the call, Attorney Lamar. And we have Pastor Christopher V. Pryor, who is the pastor of Victorious Believers Ministries in Saginaw, Michigan. He's a family man. He's been married for 24 years, and he also has a master's in educational leadership, and he just recently completed a master's in theology from Ashland Theological Seminary. He serves on several boards within the community and outside the community. He currently serves as the president of the University Board of Fellows, and we want to thank him for his service in the community and outside the community. He has received numerous awards, including Father of the Year, and we want to welcome him to the call, Pastor Christopher V. Pryor.
Thank you, Attorney Littles. It's great to be a part of this wonderful panel.
Great to have you all here. And we will have some of family members here today, but we want to get started, and I want to get started in asking you panelists today about this issue of mass incarceration, particularly in the African-American community. And we know that you have vast experience. And so I would like to start off the question, and there may be people that say, how come there are so much mass incarceration in the African community, considering that we are only 13% of the population, but we are currently account for 47% of exonerations in the US. Why do you believe that that number is so high in our community?
Hi, this is Demetrius. First, I'm grateful to have this opportunity to be on a panel with so many great and amazing individuals who are doing some amazing things in our community. From the video, and when I saw the video, it's just a reflection of what mass incarceration epitomizes. When you talk about mass incarceration in this country, you're talking about we're 5% of the world population, but 25% of the incarceration in the rate in the world. When you think about those numbers, they're ridiculous, but they're purposeful. And the reason why they're purposeful, because what it adds up to, it is just modern day slavery. The numbers that you just presented earlier, 13% of the population. Would you believe here in this state, in Michigan, the Safe and Just Michigan just released a report in August of 2019 that showed 53% of Black men are currently incarcerated in Michigan. And we're talking about 38,000 individuals who are currently in prison. So that is a lot of Black men that are locked away. Why? Because once again, it goes back to this being purposeful. It goes back to the ideas of recognizing that what has happened with incarceration and with prison, that it has become an industry. We're talking about an industry in which billions and billions of dollars are exchanging hands. And this is why the fight is so difficult, because of the fact when you're fighting against mass incarceration, you're fighting against people's finances. So mass incarceration for me is just a reflection of today's modern day slavery.
Wow. Thank you, Demetrius. Is there anyone else that has thought on that, on why the numbers are so high, particularly in our community?
I believe Demetrius hit the nail with the hammer. I personally feel like it's just history repeating itself in a form of slavery. They're just calling it something, another way to enslave, particularly the urban community. And I just believe that it's presenting itself in a different way. Same thing as slavery.
Wow. Well, Tiffany, for you, is there anyone else that wanted to comment on that?
I would like to comment. I would like to, if it's profitable, or is because it's profitable and it seems like an industry, is mass incarceration inevitable?
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, because it is, you say, is it inevitable, but it's happening in a particular community, which is the African American community.
Absolutely, because it's profitable. So I think it moves on into the realm where education, not only education for the parents or for the youth, how do we get this education into them? So what I'm asking though is, because someone completes the 12th grade or they complete a degree, does that make them exempt from this realm that we're dealing with?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. And I think it's one that we can answer as get some insight today from the panel in reference to, because the fact is that there are educated Black men that are in prison. And so it doesn't, and it's good for you to bring that issue up, because we want people to understand today that as we talk about this could be your son, it could be your nephew, it could be your father, your brother, your husband. And so does anyone else have any thoughts in reference to that, on this, of why? And what does the educational system have to do with mass incarceration, if anything?
Well, I think I've enjoyed each of your comments. I definitely think the financial aspect plays a major role. It separates families, and that's another great challenge that is affected. So the stereotype that all Black men or many Black men are not of value has really affected. So financially, the monies that are given towards students might be between $7,000 to $8,000, but when you incarcerate someone, it's about $32,000, $33,000. So we have to look at those to say, where is our heart to truly invest? And if you put those monies into the prison system, you tear families. And so one of the studies in Ed Build recently in 2019 talked about how disproportionate the monies are allocated to different school districts, into different areas. And so students in the African-American community receive $23 billion less in funding than white school districts, billions. When you look at the average household wealth for whites, it's around 171,000 compared to African-Americans or Blacks is 17,000, 10% less. So that makes an effect on homes, education, all these things. So the problem is this racism has to cease, and we have to continue to have these discussions to bring about a change.
Great. Well, when we talk about this issue of systemic racism that we've heard about, how does the panel feel? How do you feel about how that has, in a number of areas, you've talked about finances and you've talked about, resources. How has that affected this issue of mass incarceration?
I think it's major overall. I mean, these laws, structures, systems that have been developed over the years, they're hard to break. And so when you have those challenges, sometimes people don't think about life insurance, some of those things we were not afforded, home ownership, opportunities to purchase a home. Like I said, life insurance is how you build wealth. And so when the interest rate or the numbers risen higher, you can't afford to do that and provide that. And so as generation after generation, these things happen, it becomes very difficult to survive. And so these disparities are being brought to the light even more. And so I believe these ideologies, the mentalities, they've been perpetuated. They've been deep-rooted issues, and there has to be a system executed now to be in law. And people of we see now a rise in women and Blacks getting into position to be able to help make some of the changes. So now it's our time to vote, empower each other, and to really see the benefit of having the voice so that things are balanced. But it's deep-rooted. These ideologies have to be talked about and dealt with.
Yes, and so I'd like to ask you all, as because you're an educated panel, what has been, or have you had experienced panelists with racial profiling, police misconduct? Have you had any personal experiences yourself or within your families?
I think a personal experience for me was when I was in undergrad. I was arrested for driving on a suspended license. At the time, I didn't know, but unfortunately, that's not a defense. And so later down the line, while dealing with that issue, one of the clerks at the court asked me if I had actually been arrested and charged. And so that question triggered for me, oh, well, the officer had discretion to let it slide. And unfortunately, because I do believe because of the color of my skin, I wasn't afforded that opportunity to just drive home and be done with the matter. I actually had to go through the process of being arrested, being booked, and deal with that charge in the legal system.
Wow. In a lot of areas where other people have had other options. Has anyone else had any interface, or have your family members have any interface or friends with the law, with racial profiling?
For me, it's personal, definitely so. Most people until this time did not realize the education that we had to provide for our sons. As being a pastor, I've had to educate my sons of when pulled over or if pulled over, how we should handle ourselves. And so the hands are on the wheel. Officer, I'm reaching to get my wallet in the glove box. All these things are discussions that probably 3-4 years ago that I have to constantly remind and educate my sons about. With some of my white colleagues that I sit on boards with, that said, you know what, that never crossed my mind. We've never had that discussion. And so it's an unfortunate situation. That is true. Yes, I've been pulled over. I was driving a decent vehicle. Nothing wrong. I was frisked. So when I'm in my suit, I'm Pastor Chris. When I'm just comfortable being and enjoying life, it's a totally different story. I've been frisked upon a car and asked, what did I do? So these things have happened to me, and it's unfortunate. So I'm not telling someone else's story. I'm telling you Christopher Vachon Pryor's story that has happened in my life. And it's not a good feeling. It hurts when you know that you've done nothing wrong. But one thing you do know is just sit there and wait until it's done.
Wow. Demetrius, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, for myself, when the video was playing and they mentioned something about an inherited trait, that struck me to the core. The reason being is because I think back on October 9th of 1922, where my great-grandfather went to prison for 2 years for resisting arrest. Now, the odd thing about this was there was no underlining charge. What was he resisting arrest for? But he was just sent to prison for resisting arrest to the worst prison in Louisiana at that time, Angola prison. From that part on, it just went down to my grandfather. My grandfather here in Michigan went to prison and for what they said was stealing a television out of a hotel. And fortunately, he won his appeal. However, 2 months later, he died of cancer.
Wow.
To my father, who did not go to prison, but he was drafted at 19 and went to Vietnam. And when he came back, he was never the same.
Wow.
To myself, at 22 years old, was sentenced to spend 3 natural life terms in prison with a 10 to 20 for possession of a controlled substance. No violence, no priors, but because of the war on drugs initiative that was being implemented at that time, I was sentenced to spend the rest of my life incarcerated. Fortunately, I was blessed to be able to do a commutation during Graham's own administration. The parole board saw merit to it, she saw merit to it, and I was released. But now, with my 5-year-old son, I refuse to allow that trait to be passed on to him. So therefore, what I do is, just as Pastor was saying, I make sure to educate him on how to respond. It's the unfortunate reality of our society, but it's something that needs to be taught to young Black men.
So we're teaching this, and we call it the conversation. You know, the conversation that we have with our young Black men. And aside from, in addition to having that conversation, what is it that we need to be doing, or we should be doing in the various segments of our society and our communities to help combat mass incarceration? Tiffany, what do you think about that in reference to the educational system?
Well, one of the things is, number one, we can have the conversation with our children, but at the same time, we also got to provide education to those families. You know, going beyond just participating in workshops, but connecting them with resources in the community to help engage them, because a lot of it is traumatic for our families. And so I believe there's a lot of training that needs to take place, and even at the school level, to work with those families, because our children do come with us when they have incarcerated parents or family members. We do see an increase in behavior issues. There's a lot of social and emotional issues. We also see that dropout rate increase as well. And part of it, you know, is that because that lack of having that male figure in the household, I will tell you, I can't just say just because a child is a single parent household doesn't mean that they're going to be successful, but there are issues that come along with that. Kids need 2 parents, you know, and especially if one has just been taken away from them just because they, you know, a parent has received a long sentence, or they were wrongly put in prison, or it could have been something that they've done, but are we looking at, is the system being fair to them? So we got to go beyond just having the conversation about what you do if you get pulled over as an African-American male or African-American person, period, but diving down deep in educating those families on what to do, how to take action, and how to have a voice for themselves.
That's wonderful. Does anybody else want to comment on what we need to do? What do we need to do as a community?
Community Attorney Littles is really coming together. I think we need to educate our young people about the history. We need to really invest in each other. I think that's one of the key things, is really investing. You know, I think they say Asian community keeps the dollar in their community for 20-something days. The Jews about 16 days, and in the African American community, it's only like 6 hours. So that we need to do those things that helps us strengthen ourselves. I think we need to fight to get Black history, not only just in February, but we need them in our educational books. I believe it's important for all races to understand the inventions that we have created. So many people don't know. They only see small pictures or glimpses of Black history. But all the things that we have created in society are a tremendous blessing to every day. Another thing, we must take time to educate whites. For this time, I realized many of them said, you know, some of them, I didn't notice, I didn't realize this. And so I think now was the time. I tell people all the time, when you're building momentum, you have to take every moment. Moment is in the word momentum. And when you take every moment, we have to use these moments to educate, okay? I know this has happened over 50 years ago that we've seen this, but this is a moment that I believe that is God ordained for us to educate and transformation to take place. So we need to ask whites, you know, who are willing to speak up and share. We have to do more about talking about music, sports. We have to talk about voting and right, the House and state of representative. These are discussions on a regular basis we must have. So in a nutshell, we have to educate ourselves. We need to make sure that we're fighting to get Black books, education in our education, so people are learning and empower themselves. And then I say all the time, have tough discussions. This isn't going to be, it's not going to be easy, okay? But here's a quote that I always remember, and it says, comfort and prosperity have never enriched the world more than adversity. And so with this, there are going to have to be tough discussions for us to have with people. You got to learn to disagree, and you got to learn to win relationships and not the argument. So we got to take time and dig deep in this situation. But I believe, I just stay optimistic. Changes are coming, and that's just part of my nature. But we have to stay focused.
Absolutely. There have been, and you mentioned adversity. We are in a situation now in our country where there's been a lot of adversity, outward adversity. We've had protests. We have a number of things that have happened, you know, following George Floyd's death. And so when we think about those things, there's been a lot of talk about police misconduct. And so I'd like to hear from the panel today about your thoughts about police misconduct and how that has played a role in this issue of mass incarceration, and what is it that you believe we can do about it?
Well, for me, I think when you're talking about police misconduct, I don't think it just stops with police. Because when you're talking about mass incarceration, the ones who actually are in control of people being incarcerated is the prosecutors when it comes down to it. And that's what we have to focus on. Pastor said it best. He said about utilizing our right to vote, lifting up our voices, making sure that we're putting progressive prosecutors in these positions. You know, because when you look at it on this level, although the police do not report directly to the prosecutors still hold authority over them. And the reason why they still hold authority over them is because of the fact that the prosecutors will get files and reports from the police, and then it's up to them if they want to pursue criminal charges. They have a lot of power, and this power can be expressed to them saying, well, you know something, I see that there's some racial bias behind what this report, or, you know something, what you guys have done in this, the report it's questionable police work here. So there's a lot of power in the prosecution. And I believe that that's where we have to focus a lot of our attention on getting the right people in the position who's going to question the actions of these police officers.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on that in reference to police misconduct? Because as he said, you know, it's the decision of the prosecutor, but that report initially comes in from police. So any other thoughts in reference to police misconduct and perhaps even the allocation of resources to the police departments across the country?
I think that police misconduct has gone on for a very long time, and it's just accepted. I don't know why, but again, it's just accepted. And I agree with what you're saying about the prosecutors having power, of course, but I think the system works together. So how was that report written up? And if it's who disputes, you know, whether it's right or wrong, or do prosecutors really have the guts to go against? Because again, if you ruffle feathers, then more feathers are ruffled, and then are we willing to, is the community really willing to handle what is going to come down the pipe?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Pastor?
I think it's important. Brother Demetrius said it, you know, the prosecutor plays a significant role in that. You said the word defunding. I don't think necessarily, we need protection. There'll be people who will do negative things. I don't believe that all police are bad people. There are a few bad apples in the bunch, same as it would be in any industry. But we have to weed those out. And it is vitally important for us to make sure that we do so, okay? I know they're going through more training, and you get a lot of training. Information is good, but we need transformation of the heart. And so that's the difference, I think, when it comes into all of this. You can train me, I can go through this, I can do that. But if my heart is wrong, then there are issues. And so a man against his will is of the same opinion still. They're going to keep just doing. And so with that, we have to make sure that we get in position, that we're providing opportunities. Sometimes for the next person to get a position, we have to be strategic and not cannibalize. We may have to step back in order to let that person that we know who's going to help carry a voice. I'm not saying carry a voice to just put Black people first. I'm saying to carry a voice so that there's balance in the system. And so that's a big difference. So we're not haters of people, but there is a problem. Our history has shown that police brutality has gone on. And hear me with this. It was before 1971 when the war on drugs came, okay? We were getting beat in 1940. We were getting beat in 1920. So with that being said, I think it's very important. It shows that there's been a problem before the war on drugs, okay? There was a problem against Black people in 1920. When we look in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and those lives were affected there. So when we look at America's history, there has to be a gut check of how America feels about Black people. So if it was just a war on drugs in 1970s, that would be different, okay? But if that was the case, they would have been killing Italians. They would have been killing those who were bringing the drugs to here. And I'm not here to pick on any race, but I'm just saying the truth has to be told. You've been hitting us, killing us from 57 years ago. Your knee has been on our neck for just standing. And like Dr. Martin Luther King did, he was a man of nonviolence. And so when we look at the historicity of things, this isn't just May or of George Floyd. This isn't just 50 years ago with Dr. Martin Luther King. This has been since we've been here. And so because Emancipation and Proclamation 1863 was great. We celebrate June 10th. All this history is there, but still 2 years later, a group in Texas didn't even really know that they were free. So we've got to deal with the root cause. Hear me today. We've got to deal with, the truth is there's a problem about Blacks in this country until we rise up. But I don't want to spiritualize it. I believe, and I have to just say this is the year, we look at this over 400 years. We look at the history in the Bible, Genesis 15 and 12, the 400 years that the children of Israel were in slavery. God is systematic in everything he does. Last year, I went back to Ghana, to Africa. We celebrated 400 years then. God does things strategically. I believe he used the president to come like we have in this day. And I'm not here to knock anybody, but to expose the truth that has been going on in this country. Oh, if I was in church, they say amen.
we'll give you a little amen, Pastor. We'll give you a little amen.
Right.
Hey, you know,
makes a mistake.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important in all of the areas that we deal in. We have a panelist here that, you know, work with families and in the educational system. We have pastor. I know you see families, you know, all the time. And I think it was Demetrius that said earlier that we're just seeing another form of slavery. And so a lot of times when people think about African Americans, that's the first thing they think about. But as we look at this COVID, even in COVID issues in reference to prisoners, last week or about a couple of weeks ago, the governor of the state of Michigan declared a war on racism. So I'd like to ask you all in reference to that, what does that mean to you? What do you think that that means for us? And she established a Black Leadership Advisory Council. And in your opinion, what does that council need to do in order to help even not only address the health issue, but the issue of racism?
I am very opinionated on this, and I'm going to tell you why, because I work with the prison system, and I've seen the horrors that's caused by COVID-19 in the prison system. We're talking about, since its onslaught, we're talking about over 4,000 individuals in prison have been tested positive. That's not including in some of the institutions where the outbreak happened and where the hotspots were, that these were individuals after they'd done the test, they found antibodies in their system, which means the whole prison was affected. There's no way that social distancing can be done in prison. Another number, which is so astonishing, is we have 68 deaths currently, and that's just the first wave. Unfortunately, right now, a second wave is raging through the system, and it's hitting the prison systems that are up north. And when you talk about the prison systems up north, you're talking about the prison systems that are more populated by Black individuals. Why? Because they are the higher levels. And statistically, in Michigan, the average Black man that is incarcerated is always forwarded up to a higher level. So now, and when you're talking about up north, now it's hitting there, and it's hitting just as hard, just as impactful. So what we had been trying to do is we had been trying to reach out, you know, to the governor, and, you know, petitions, and we've been lobbying, and we've been sending suggestions like, hey, all it takes is an executive order. That's all it takes to create some space in the prison system. Unfortunately, we did not get a response. When it first came, there was a sense of urgency. But once that sense of urgency began to decrease, then what they were intending on doing began to stop. So I have a very strong opinion in regards towards this, because I've seen it firsthand, the devastation, the calls I get from family members who are saying, my son was sentenced to a 2-year term that has turned into a death sentence. This is the reality of COVID-19 behind prison walls, and it needs to be addressed.
So how can our voices, that's a very good point. So how do we use our voices with this new Black Leadership Advisory Council that the governor is setting in place? If there are people out listening today, how can we have three? I think sometimes we forget that we have 3 branches of government. How can we as citizens, we have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, and we have judicial. We've been talking a lot about, and we'll talk about a lot about the judicial branch affecting the cases that we're going to talk about today. But how can people now, in reference to people that are sitting in their homes, ordinary people, listening to this town hall meeting, what can we do as ordinary citizens to combat this issue? Either through our governor's office, through the legislature, what can we do?
Attorney Littles, real quick, what we can do is this, is when they first made this announcement, I was actually nominated to sit on that board. They did reach out to me, but I hadn't heard anything since. So just having individuals on there who are actually understand the problem, understand the issue firsthand. So what I would say is, for those who are sitting at home, say, hey, reach out to the governor's office, say, we want individuals who are directly impacted by this sitting on the board. We just don't want hand-picked individuals by your office. We want people who are selected by our community to sit on these panels to express our concerns and our needs.
Wow. Anyone else? I think great suggestion. Anyone else have any suggestions of what we can do?
I'm on this one of the subcommittees that helps there to the governor. So I think pointing out one of the goals of what we decided to do was to bring all of the prosecutors, chief of police, and the clergy from our end. We submitted names of the mayor, the prosecutor, the sheriff, the chief of police, and we've come together as clergy in the state of Michigan. So with being on that, we really said it's time, no shrinking back, no time to step back. It's time to march forward. And so it's an effort. I think Dr. Tellis Chapman is representing us overall on that board. But with that, we have pulled together and looking for a date to bring all of these individuals together. We think now it's going to, of course, have to be via Zoom. But we're working hard, and the priests are taking their rightful place. I tell people also from the voting, we know there'll be a problem with mailing in. Well, take it off and drop it off to the township. It's only 3 blocks from you, okay? So just drop it off. Don't wait till voting day. There are different things. Get on education boards. Your husband, a busy man serving in the medical field, got on the educational board in Saginaw when you resided here. Everyone, be a part of your neighborhood block program. Meet your neighbors. All these things are so important. Go across the street. There used to be a day in our community we took sugar across the street. Just, hey, girl, I love you. But we've lost that. And so we have to regain that. We have to love on our children. We have to speak life into our children. So I believe all these things are important, not only from an economic point of view, from a legislative point of view, but last, from a community point of view of building each other.
Tiffany, what do you think? We've done a lot. I know you've done a lot with families and communities. You're seeing, you've been able to see this issue, write about this issue, talk about it nationally on various levels. What are your thoughts in reference to what families should be doing or can do?
I'm going to ditto everything that everybody else said. You're going to have to get involved in the community. You're going to have to contact the local state officials, your county officials, the state representatives for your area, and let your voice be heard, because that's what they're supposed to do, represent you. And then even I kind of want to take it back a little bit. One of the things that has to happen, not even just looking at our families, but also looking at those people who work in the government system. Pastor Chris talked about that there has to be a transformation of the heart. You got to start with those 3 branches first, and there has to be a transformation of their heart. I know in the school system, we do a lot of work around that restorative practices where we focus on bringing about healing, where the people admit to the harm that has been done. And then we, as a group, whether it's with the families, the government system, the schools, the families, communities, everybody working together to figure out now what do we need to do to make it right. So it has to be some real true restorative conversations with an action plan in place, because we can have, and somebody mentioned that, we can have all the trainings, which is needed, but we also have to have an action plan on how do we move forward. So for our families, I would say, get out there, talk to your state representatives, talk to the other local officials. Don't be afraid to reach out to some of the minority attorneys that I know that's willing to also help, and even not just minority attorneys, people that believe in the cause of being equal, but there has to be restorative conversations, and healing has to take place within the government, the families, and the community.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Carla, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I sure do. I agree with Tiffany 100% that we have to start somewhere, and we have to make an impact. We have to collaborate with other organizations, and I do believe that Pastor Chris said the same thing, that the collaboration and get that education in there, how we can get it in there. I know that we developed in the Saginaw Public Schools before a parent coalition where they met once a week at Arthur Eddy Academy, and they talked about those issues. However, dismantling the myth that we don't talk about anything. Right. Absolutely. We don't talk about anything. So we have to dismantle that myth, and we have to open up our dinner table We have to talk about these things at home. What are we going through? We all know, we've all been there. We've grown up. We know that we go through things mentally, physically, spiritually. So being able to feel free in a safe place to talk about those issues that we're going through, mentally especially. How many people, oh, we don't talk about that. But how many people, I mean, my dad, my grandmother, you ask them things or you want to know. They were a little bit hesitant to give information, even about, especially about health. What, you know, I've got this. Where did this come from? But we just have to dismantle that myth that we don't talk anymore. We need to do that.
Absolutely. And so, you know, one of the things that we know is there was an article, a controversial New York Times article, 1.5 million missing Black men, was published in April of 2015. Black men's absence disrupts family formation, leading both to lower marriage rates and higher rates of childbirth outside of marriage. The article goes on to claim incarceration and early deaths are the overwhelming drivers of the gap. Of the 1.5 million missing Black men from the ages of 25 to 34, which demographers call the prime age years, higher imprisonment rates account for almost 600,000. Almost 1 in 12 Black men in this age group are behind bars, compared to 1 in 60 non-Black men in this age group, 1 in 200 Black women, and 1 in 500 non-Black women. So I'd like you to take a look at this short video that we have, and then we'll come back and continue our conversation. It's coming.
It is traumatic to a community when disproportionately there is an absence of men in the community because so many of them are serving such long sentences. You know, and having a parent that's in prison, you don't have your mom supporting you through life, or you don't have your dad encouraging you in ways that are necessary to develop. They're also wearing the burdens of their parents' crime. They didn't commit a crime.
My mother was incarcerated when I was younger. I was a baby, and I went into foster care.
I was in my mom's belly when he went to jail. When my dad gets out, I'll be 15.
My dad is so far.
They gave my dad 20 years, and that's a long time.
A growing number of American prisons are now contracted out as for-profit businesses to for-profit companies. The companies are paid by the state, and their profit depends on spending as little as possible on the prisoners and the prisons.
The reason why we like the private prison industry from a stock investment perspective, we think that there's substantial opportunity for growth. In 2004, there was about 6% market share. 2014, 8.3%. Over the past 10 years, they gained about 35%. It's an interesting and compelling investment opportunity for a lot of investors today.
So that video just confirms what a lot of our panelists have already said. This is a profitable business. We are building more prisons, and we are building, you know, for students and our children who are now in the 3rd and 4th grade. So it really tells a story. But we need to look. We want to look today at the long-lasting effects that mass incarceration has had on the Black family, and more specifically, how 2 Michigan families have been affected by this. And so we have today. We're going to be talking about in 2001, Robin Hines was arrested for the murder of Demond King in Detroit, Michigan, and was later convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole at the age of 17. After maintaining his claim of innocence for years, with the help of his supporters, he was finally able to obtain a miscellaneous file from the Detroit Police Department that was wrongfully withheld 19 years ago from his trial attorney. and contains evidence that actually proves his innocence. He has been away from his family for almost 2 decades now. His uncle Cedric Hines is here to speak on the impact that his absence has had on their family. So I want to welcome to the call today, Mr. Cedric Hines, and you can come into the call. And we also have a family member of Alonzo Clark Jr. of Inkster, Michigan, who was wrongfully convicted of first-degree murder in 2005. He has a pending application with the Wayne County Conviction Integrity Unit, which claims his actual innocence and alleges that police misconduct led to his wrongful conviction over 15 years ago. The alleged police misconduct includes officers threatening to harm witnesses if they testified on his behalf. His sister Courtney Clark is here to speak about how their family has been impacted since his imprisonment. I want to welcome Courtney Clark to the panel, and I also want to welcome Cedric Hines to the panel.
Hello, hi, how are you?
How are you? How are you?
I'm
We're gonna get into this conversation today. I want to, do we have Courtney there?
Hey.
Hi, Courtney, how are you?
Good, you?
Good, thank you for being here today. I know that it's still a difficult time for you all, and I'm thankful to you for coming in and speaking out about this issue. I first want to make sure that we set the framework for the discussion that we're going to have with you on how this has affected your family. So I want to turn it over to Attorney Janae Lamar, and she's going to go through, because of some of the information for us, because a lot of you out there may be thinking, how is it possible for someone to be wrongly convicted, especially at this mass rate of wrongful convictions? And so I think as she goes through some of the information on the Robert Hines case, and I'll be talking somewhat about Alfonso's case today, we're going to have her walk through some things that will explain to us how we got to where we are today. So I will turn this over to Attorney Janae Lamar. As she comes, we'll see that as you look at these, that's okay. As we're looking at these pictures, I want everyone to realize that these are real families. A lot of times we hear about people being incarcerated and their numbers, but these are real families with real lives. And so we're going to get into the conversation, Attorney Lamar. After you finish, we're going to get into conversation about how these families have been impacted and how our communities have been impacted.
Certainly. And so, as Attorney Little stated previously, Robert was wrongfully convicted of a first-degree premeditated murder and a weapons charge. And during his trial, there were a number of miscarriages of justice that took place. The main things that were uncovered from the miscellaneous file was an overwhelming amount of evidence which proves Robert's innocence. And if you could pull up the slides, I can walk through those exhibits. We can move to Exhibit A. Okay, so Exhibit A shows a letter from Robert's appellate attorney indicating that they did not actually obtain the forensic report that was used to convict Robert in his case. And so because he didn't have the forensic report, what Robert's appellate attorney did was state in the appellate statement of facts that Robert was connected to the crime by DNA evidence. And this wasn't true because at trial, what happened was the DNA was found to be inconclusive, meaning that the judge, meaning that Robert, meaning that anybody in the courtroom could not be excluded from the DNA. So that resulted in inconclusive results. And nowhere in Robert's appellate brief should it have stated
I'm sorry, we lost you for a minute.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
Okay. So if we move on to Exhibit B, which are fingerprints, it was never disclosed to Robert's trial attorney that there were usable fingerprints found in the vehicle that he was allegedly driving in connection with the murder. And the issue with the usable fingerprints not being disclosed to his trial attorney was simply that he did not have the opportunity to show the jury that these fingerprints didn't belong to him. In addition to that, the usable fingerprints were not disclosed. So there were usable fingerprints as well as unusable fingerprints, and the usable fingerprints are the ones at issue, which showed that that they were not Robert's fingerprints, that the results were negative. And then if we move on to Exhibit C, which shows that a hair follicle with the root attached was found in the vehicle tied to the crime. And that piece of evidence was never disclosed to Robert's attorney. And in addition to that, since it wasn't disclosed to his attorney, it wasn't tested. So to this very day, while we're sitting here, we don't know who that hair follicle belongs to. Robert maintains that it isn't his, and he's positive that once it's tested, it will not return a result that it belongs to him. If we move on to Exhibit D, which are home invasion reports, Exhibit D debunks the prosecution's theory that the decedent was not killed because of a random act of robbery. And so with this particular report, home invasions had occurred, and that would tend to show that the decedent unfortunately did have some people that were out to get him, and that would also show that Robert wasn't one of the people involved in the decedent's previous dealings with other people that he had issues with. If we move on to Exhibit E, which is a police report and a tip sheet indicating that the decedent's child had a relationship with someone else who had threatened to kill the decedent, who had threatened to kill the victim, Damon King. And that report would also tend to show that there was yet someone else that Damon King had issues with. And if we move on to Exhibit G, there was yet another tip sheet that mentions a man named Earl. And because this tip sheet was not forwarded to Robert's trial attorney, she did not have the opportunity to investigate who this possible suspect was. And if we move on to Exhibit H, it's an affidavit, which is sworn statement indicating that someone else was driving the vehicle that Robert was allegedly driving in connection to the murder. And there's a number of sworn facts in there about Robert's innocence.
Is that it?
And unfortunately, all of this evidence being withheld from Robert ultimately resulted in a wrongful conviction. And one of the issues that we've talked about in the previous town halls was the prosecutor, Wayne County prosecutor's requirement to disclose all of the evidence, including these exhibits that were not given to Robert's attorney. And so with that, we get a wrongful conviction, and now we're here with Robert, waiting 18 years later to be released from prison for an investigation to occur that we don't necessarily know the status of. And so while he's waiting, the cause of all of this is because of what we believe to be prosecutorial misconduct.
So Attorney Lamar, let's go back a little for the benefit of our audience, that we know that when people enter into the system and there is a trial, and Robert had a trial, correct?
Correct.
And you mentioned that the prosecutor has a duty to disclose any exculpatory information that they have in their file. So the information that you're talking about is information that was never disclosed.
Correct.
So when people are asking and they're looking and say, how can this be? How can this happen that you have a file after all these years with all of this exculpatory information, which basically says that this person is not the person who committed this crime? How can that be, especially in a system where we are supposedly innocent until proven guilty?
It happens for a number of reasons, and I can't give you every reason, but the thing that I'll focus on is the fact that unfortunately Black men and women are at a disadvantage when they come in contact with the criminal justice system. That begins with the arrest, it leads next to the charge, and then the ultimate plea or trial, once charged. And so one of the main issues is the difference between court-appointed counsel and retained counsel. And I've talked about it before. When you're given a court-appointed attorney, the likelihood of that attorney handling your matter with the care and the detail that is necessary to actually, yield a positive outcome for you is slim. And that's because the court-appointed attorney is not being paid at a rate comparable to the retained attorney. The court-appointed attorney, unfortunately, also doesn't really care. The court-appointed attorney is usually a white person, and we've seen it all play out. It's not to say that all court-appointed attorneys are racist or don't care for Black people, but they certainly carry some prejudices and some biases. And I think Pastor Chris talked about it early. They're not educated about some of the issues and the background that that Black defendants are dealing with. And
and let me say this. I have to interrupt because when I think there are court-appointed attorneys, I don't give anybody any that there are court-appointed attorneys who are very good, who excellent attorneys. One of the things I've heard you mention before, which I think is critical, is that, but they don't have the resources. They don't. So even if they're a great attorney, which I think has to be frustrating, that there are certain things that you need in terms of investigators, a number of other things. Speak to us about the resources that are not available to court-appointed attorneys.
So that significantly changed present day. The resources are there now, but when Robert was convicted, you didn't have the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission, which now appoints funds for investigators and for other additional things that might be necessary to properly investigate and present a case at trial. And so, because Robert didn't have those resources available, that was yet another disadvantage for him. So the difference between now and 20 years ago is that because those resources weren't available, people, continue to just take pleas or continue to be convicted just because of lack of resources. And that shows a disparity between Black and white defendants and other people of color and white defendants.
Very good, very good. Thank you so much. And I want to have the families come on. When I think about the Alfonso Clark, who was also wrongfully convicted, first-degree murder, there were a lot of disparities in his case also, in reference to having evidence and witnesses who later said that they were threatened by detectives if they showed up or they testified on his behalf. Attorney Lamar, explain to us how that process works in reference to the detectives, their involvement, the prosecutor's involvement, the police involvement, and how that system works together to help come to a final conclusion of the matter, along with a trial by jury or a judge.
So the police officers, obviously coming in contact with the criminal justice system starts with them with an arrest. And so once an arrest has been made and the information forwarded to the prosecutor has the decision to charge or not charge. And I think that it was discussed earlier, there's a lot of discretion and a lot of power that the prosecution holds. And so once a prosecutor makes a decision to proceed with the charge, they have to do so based on probable cause. There has to be some evidence, some belief, some testimony that the crime charged of was actually committed. And so the prosecutor absolutely does some investigatory work along with law enforcement. And when all of the evidence is presented from law enforcement, which is their side of the V, they can assess whether or not the case should, the charge should actually proceed. And oftentimes what happens is prosecutors, they proceed with the charge, and then they later, discover other evidence. They later discover other facts. They later discover other witnesses that are able to say, hey, this didn't happen the way that it's being presented. And sometimes you have this even before you ever get to trial, but the prosecution is, for lack of better words, thirsty to get a conviction. And so prosecutors oftentimes are not actually looking to pursue actual justice. Actual justice is not a conviction. And with that, they proceed with the charge. They proceed with their case. They get people up there testifying, committing perjury. They've seen the reports where people have been held for hours giving police testimony. They've seen all of the different evidence that's pretty much telling them, hey, this is probably not a good case to try, but they go forth with it anyway, because in their mind, justice is getting somebody on the hook, convicting somebody for the charge to close the case and say, hey, we got somebody.
Wonderful. I want to talk to the families, but then I want to come back, Attorney Lamar, and talk to you about this issue, particularly that has been in Detroit Police Department for some time, in reference to some corruption that's been there, some things that actually happened during this time that Robert and Alfonso have gone through the system. And so I'll bring you back. I want you to stay right there. And Courtney, I'd like to hear from you. Thank you for coming. We are glad to have you here. Now, you are the sister of Alfonso, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And can you give us a little background on Alfonso's case and what's happening with it now? And I ask you some questions about how this has really affected your family.
So for background on the case, the narrative that the detective was trying to create was like some sort of drug deal gone wrong, that type of issue. The prosecution's only witness is actually the victim's brother. He said that my brother was the perpetrator, but there were two other witnesses that said that that wasn't possible for various reasons. Either he wouldn't have had enough of a vantage point, one of those people were sitting right next to him. They're like, no, he couldn't have seen that because I couldn't see it. There was another vantage point. They were like, well, I got a decent view and he doesn't match the description of your brother. And then you have two other men who wanted to come forward with information, but were threatened by Detective Doug Greco. There was never any physical evidence to tie my brother to the crime, like no gun or like no blood or anything like that. So I don't know.
So here we have, is this your older brother or younger brother?
Older.
Your older brother. Okay. So we know sisters look up to their older brothers. And so I know this is difficult, but explain to people the effect this has had on your family in terms of not having your brother there. It's been some time now of not having your brother there. How old were you when your brother was convicted?
I was 16.
Okay. Tell us about how that affected you.
Yeah, so, I mean, he's been in prison pretty much like half my life at this point. He missed a lot of milestones, like, graduations and things like that. And that was kind of hard. I think it's, affected myself and my parents like differently. I feel like each of us dealt with it differently. Like my dad is more the, the more stoic and pray about it type. I try to like just push through it, but I feel like my mom has been the most affected by it, and it's just really been devastating for her, like her mental health, even physically. Like it's just been hard on her, and it's not getting easier.
It's not getting easy. Tell us what your brother was like as a child. As a brother, is he your only brother?
Yes, it's just us two.
Just the two of you?
Yeah. He's 7 years older than I am. I remember my mom telling me that like when he found out he was gonna have a little sister, like his immediate reaction was, wait, I get less presents for Christmas. Hold on. So he wasn't thrilled, but like I grew on him, and he was very protective. And I mean, we would spend a lot of time together when we were kids. The age gap, we kind of went, did our own things. He was growing up, he was in his 20s, I was in my teens, but he was always present, I would say. Mm-hmm. Since he's been gone, I feel like we've gotten closer.
Wow. Tell us about that. About you getting closer as he's been gone.
Because there are a lot of things with him being in prison he can't do for himself. And then there's like the technological gap where it's like certain things my parents don't know how to do on the computer. Like don't try to get them to figure out JPay or those kind of things, where just communication. So I've had to step in a lot of ways with that. And like, even with this legal stuff, like sometimes dealing with like the PI, for example, that was just an easier thing for me to do than to try to push that off on my parents. I've talked to him more than anybody else. I feel like it's just a lot of, I don't know, it's reciprocal, but I feel like I have to be there for him in a lot of ways.
Now, how far is he from you?
He's been there 15 years, and for the first time last year, he was actually sent really far. He's like a Chippewa Correctional Facility.
Wow.
He's in right now.
Okay. I want you to stay there. I thank you for sharing the story. I want to bring in Mr. Hines, Cedric Hines, and he is the uncle of Robert Hines. And Mr. Hines, come in and tell us how this has affected your family.
This has affected our family tremendously. It's taken a mental and emotional toll on us for the better part of the 18, 19, almost 20 years that he's been incarcerated. In the beginning, it really took a toll on our family. His mom, my dad, it sent them in a tailspin.
Is his mom your sister?
Yes.
Okay.
Sent them in a tailspin. She was coming out of an addiction process, and she was clean, she was sober, and when that happened, when they sentenced him to natural life, that sent her in a tailspin. She kind of fell off. My dad, he was a recovering alcoholic. They kicked my parents' dough in twice. After the second time, my dad had been sober for about maybe 10, 11 years. Next day, we found him intoxicated from alcohol. It's just taking a tremendous toll on my family, still to this day.
Now you were there the day that he was convicted, or
yes.
the decision came down.
Yes.
Tell us what it was like in the courtroom.
It was very chaotic. For whatever reason, it just seems as if the whole 11th precinct was just in there. I mean, you had every bit of 20 to 30 police officers just standing around the wall. They were just so gung-ho on getting that conviction for whatever reason. It was almost unreal. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's something that I can't explain. That was one of the worst days of my life.
And he was 17 at the time.
17 years old.
17 years old.
Yeah.
Was he still in high school, or he finished high school?
Well, no, at the time he wasn't in high school. He had been incarcerated for almost a year or so at that point, but he was still in high school. He was going to Osborne, actually.
Okay. All right. So his high school was interrupted.
Yeah.
He was incarcerated.
Yes.
And and then at some point there was a sentencing.
Yeah.
And were you there for the sentencing?
No, I didn't go back. Actually, I couldn't go back for the sentencing because of a situation that had happened prior, and with the prosecution, of course. It was devastating. I had situation with the prosecution where I couldn't be there for the sentencing.
So it looks like you were looking at these pictures, and it looks like a very nice family. You had a family unit, you know, of course, but you know, you've mentioned that there were some issues within the family that were being resolved but it sent the family into a tailspin.
Yeah, definitely.
And yes. And so how has it been all of these years in terms of ability to communicate with him or even talk about it within the family unit?
I mean, the ability to communicate with him is good. You know what I'm saying? Me and him, we communicate almost daily. You know what I'm saying? At least 2-3 times a week, me and him are communicating. He communicates with his mom on a regular. They have a good relationship. It's hard because when you genuinely and truly love someone that was snatched off the street for something that you know that they didn't do, you can't reach out and touch that individual on special occasions. You can't hug them. So as far as the communicating on that aspect, we're missing out on all of that. But as far as communicating, we talk. We have a great relationship.
And what is your thoughts in reference to now? You know, the nation, the world is going through this COVID virus, and you must have some other thoughts in reference to.
That's one of my biggest fears. I know he's fighting to be exonerated, and one of my biggest fears is, you know what I'm saying, inevitably he may not ever see the light of day as a result of contacting the COVID virus. That's one of my biggest fears. So I'm hoping and praying that, you know what I'm saying, we can get some traction and, you know what I'm saying, they can speed up the process to where, you know, he can eventually be exonerated before he contracts the COVID virus. You know what I'm saying?
For people who are listening today, what would you want them to know? What do you want us to know as having a family member that, you know, you're trying to keep in contact with, you continue to love, you have some concerns about their health, and people who are looking, and we're talking about mass incarceration, what would you want people to know?
It's difficult. Just love on your loved ones that are incarcerated, you know what I'm saying? Just try to be there for them as much as possible. Support them wherever you can, encourage them, keep their spirits lifted. That's one of the main things, to keep their spirits lifted and to keep them encouraged, because it does become mentally and emotionally draining for them, especially when they're sitting there, they're fighting, they're doing everything that they can, but everything that they can do is limited because of where they are in their situation and the circumstances. So you have to keep them lifted and you know what I'm saying, and encouraged. But just most of all, continue to love on them no matter what. Support them and do everything you can. If they're fighting for their freedom, do everything as a loved one and do everything you can out here to help them in their pursuit of to be exonerated or whatever the case may be. Just do whatever you can to help them. Nothing's too big, nothing's too small, because whatever my nephew needs me to do, if I can do it, it's done. I just want him home because he's lost 20 years of his life. We've lost 20 years of our lives together. You know what I'm saying? He's my nephew, but he was like a little brother, so to speak. And I just want him home. It's just that simple. I just want him home.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. And thank you for continuing the fight, you know, for him. And we surround you as a community and continuing that fight. But thank you for coming on and telling the story and how this has affected your family. And, you know, we continue to pray for your family and for those who have been affected so harshly in reference to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you can stay there. Courtney, I just have a couple more questions for you. You know, as I was asking Mr. Hines, were you there on the day that that the conviction came?
Yes.
And can you tell us what that was like sitting in the courtroom?
I remember feeling like it was a mistake. Like I didn't understand why they couldn't see it the way that we saw it. And it was just so much evidence that I felt like proved that he was innocent. So I remember feeling like really confused, but like at the same time in the back of my mind, I was like, we can fix it. Like I didn't know a lot, as much as I know now about legal proceedings, but I knew that appeals were an option. I was like, okay, we can fix it. I mean, 15 years later, it's not fixed, obviously, but I feel like at the time I had a lot of faith in the system that it would, you know, it would turn around.
What is your feeling about the system today?
I'm definitely not as optimistic as I once was. But I mean, I do have gratitude for, forums like this one, and just the fact that more attention is being brought to the fact that it's not fair and there's an issue and it affects some people more than it affects others. And like that I can't say I'm grateful for.
Well, I want to thank you for being here and for representing your family. And, not only are we going to do what we can do, but we are going to be praying for you and your family and for Mr. Hines and the family, because it's very difficult. And we can see it's very difficult. And you had mentioned that there were some other issues and between the families in terms of mental health issues, because it does affect you mentally to have a person plucked out of your life. And so thank you for being here, Courtney. And we're going to continue our conversation with the panelists to see what we can continue to do to help this issue of mass incarceration be annihilated. Thank you for being here. Okay, panel. I want to talk to Demetrius for a minute. Demetrius, I'd like for you to come on and tell us, what is it like in the life of a prisoner, just on a daily basis?
Wow, you would ask me right after I listened to both Cedric and Courtney, and I literally felt everything that they said. Every single thing that they said, coming from a person that has been incarcerated. If you imagine, if you will, just while being incarcerated, the hardest aspect of incarceration is separation from your loved ones. You're in an environment where you're demoralized, you're dehumanized continually, because the concept is, if we can strip you of your identity, then we can control you. So you're under that type of opposition, you're under that type of oppression at all times. It's like waking up to die every single day. I can vividly remember receiving a letter from my daughter who said, "Dad, I was," excuse me, who said, "Dad, I was at my school rehearsal, my school talent show, and I was on stage and I did good, and I looked out and I didn't see you there." And that's what people incarcerated deal with every single day. The hurt, the pain, the separation. And the thing about that is you can't escape it. You may be able to avoid it for a short period of time by preoccupying yourself in sports, in the weight pit, in your music, in your artistry, in chess, but it's still always there.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you, because you're out and you're doing some great things now, but I want to talk to you and get information, your insight on the difficulties for people who are re-entering, re-entering the society, and how difficult that is, because there's some things that are in place that make it difficult for re-entry. Tell us about that and what can be done.
It's very difficult. When you're talking about re-entry, I've been home for over 10 years, and regardless of all of my accomplishment, being Black with a record, I can't even get a loan to get a house. So there are still some residual effects that I'm dealing with today. But for the most part, when an individual is coming home, just the aspect of the trauma that they're going through, trying to reintegrate back into a system that does not want them out there anyway. And so it is so many elements that a person has to deal with. You're talking about housing, you're talking about transportation, you're talking about just getting employment. Just recently, there were some organizations who worked against banning the box. But yet still, although you may not have to answer that on your application, employers still do their own research. And so, for many times I've had places where they were ready to hire me, but when they found out I had a conviction, although at the time it was over 20 years old, because it was a felony conviction, they decided they were going to go with another candidate. So there are so many different elements that individuals deal with. But I think what would help is Pastor talked about us coming together as a community. And as a community, we're coming back and we are embracing these individuals. We're letting them know that, you know something, we're here for you. We're ready to support you. We're ready to help you. We're ready to give you the resources necessary in order for you to thrive. And I think what it comes down to is us as a community just stepping up. You know, we don't have to wait for government or state to do it. We're the community. We can do it. We can get these individuals back operating and functioning in our community in productive manners.
Very good. And Carla, I just want to shoot over to you and ask you a question is, how do we help families who've been torn apart to regain stability, you know, while their person, their loved one is incarcerated, but even after they come out? Can you give us some tips on gaining stability?
I do believe that we have touched, our guests and panelists have touched on this either one time or another, where support is very, very important. Demetrius just talked about trauma. Not only does the incarcerated person go through a traumatic event while they're incarcerated, but the family has gone through a traumatic event by witnessing what is going on. And like Courtney said, at first she really, okay, so what's going on? What does that really mean? Or this said something different. This said something different. These are opposing things that are there. What, now what? Or why is this happening? It does. I do believe that someone also said about the male not being there and tearing the family apart. Cedric talked about how people relapse after recovery, and that recovery may be quite some time. However, when this trauma hits, we want some place to go to where we don't have to feel. He also talked about feelings and emotions. We have to deal with those feelings and emotions. And I talked about briefly the myth. And I don't know if other families do, but I do know, coming from an African-American family, that there are just certain things that we don't talk about. It's okay to talk about those things, but
we need to start talking.
Absolutely. We need to start communicating. We need to start talking. And one more thing, what about I don't have a problem with technology. As a matter of fact, I love it. However, there's a place and a time that we use that. So coming to the table and discussing at dinner time, how was your day? What have you, and again, feeling that safe place to come to discuss these issues that we're going through. If I keep those unresolved feelings bottled up, and those emotions bottled up, and I don't know how to deal with them, if I isolate, then I'm learning how to deal with them in my head, and I don't know how to communicate outwardly. That affects us over a long time in life and our future relationships.
Thank you so much. Panel, I want to thank you. I cannot believe it that we are at the end of our time. And I do want to go through the panel. I just want you to take 60 seconds, and I really want you to answer this question. I know it's a big question for 60 seconds, but we know that in the Black community that there's strengths within the Black community, and that we have certain superpowers within our community. So how do we harness that and to overcome the effects of mass incarceration, rebuild our communities, and create a legacy for our future generations? How do we do that? Let's start with Pastor Chris. How do we do that?
Again, thank you.
What are our strengths of the Black community? I know that you do family conference. You have one coming up. But what do we do within our communities to garner the strength of the Black community?
I think one of the key things, my prayers to the Hines and the Clark family, that justice will be served for them. One thing I can say about the Black culture is we are resilient people. Our faith in our Lord and Savior, who has brought us through, is one of the key things that the family structure, really focus on that and really helping faith overcomes injustice. And so the hope and strength in a unified voice to effectuate change is vitally important. And so I believe in the church setting, the judicial setting, we take a rightful place and help there. The closing thing I think about is a young lady by the name of Maya Moore. She's a phenomenal basketball player. For 2 years, she stepped down at the height of her game to help a young man by the name of Jonathan Irons. And because of her conviction to do what she's done, Jonathan now sings, "I Am Free." My last call is to one of my favorite people or favorite person ever. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord has upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the broken-hearted, to proclaim it to the captives, and covers to the blind, to set at liberty those who are captive." That's Jesus speaking as he was ordained in Luke 4:18. It's time for us to come together and move forward and do what our mission statement is called to do.
Thank you. Carla, I know that you've told us what you believe our strength is and how we can come together. Tiffany, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
And it must be in the spirit, Pastor Chris, because as I start to think about what our superpower is as a Black community, the first thing I thought about was resilience. As Black people, we do have, as a community, we have that resilience. Our comeback is very strong, regardless of what we've been through or what we're faced with. We have the ability to bounce back. So it is hope that as a community that we will take on that resilience and have the ability to bounce back. And when I talk about bouncing back, meaning the ability to recover and doing that recovery process, because Carla talked a lot about trauma, and with trauma there's a recovery process, and within that recovery process is building resilience. And I think if we harness in on like those 7 C's of resilience, looking at what the things we can control, making sure we're competent, we have the knowledge that we need to bring about positive change, having confidence in who we are as the Black family, regardless of what's going on, developing those coping skills, being connected to the right resources and people, whether it's spiritual, physical, social, and emotional, because we know with everything that happens, there's also mental health issues that needs to be addressed, and also dealing with character. Even as I look at my students, just because that's your parent's situation, that don't have to be your situation. How do we walk with those families through the process, and then finally just continue to contribute to society and let your voice be heard, and not only making sure that it's heard, but demanding that action takes place.
Ooh, I thank you for those 7 C's. Powerful, powerful, powerful. Carla, do you have anything else to add in reference to the superpower of the Black community? You're on mute.
Just piggybacking on what Tiffany said about resilience and Pastor Chris, and we have to be resilient. We have to support one another. We have to be comfortable in that space and understand the fact that we have the ability. We do have that superpower, believing in ourselves and our support system that we can bounce back.
Thank you. And Demetrius, superpower of the Black community.
For the sake of not adding anything else, because nothing else can be added, I completely agree with all of our panelists.
That is absolute. Panelists, I want to thank you today. I want to thank the Hines family representatives. I want to thank Courtney for coming in, for the Clark family. I want to thank each and every single panelist today. You have added so much to this conversation. I want everyone to know that if you wanted to see the exhibits that, and take a look at those, that Attorney Lamar had up, you can go to facebook.com/growingboys2men, and you can take a look at those exhibits. Again, that's facebook.com/growingboys2men, and you can see those exhibits. We cannot leave today without a call to action, because we're not having this conversation just to be having this conversation. You see, our panelists were passionate about this issue. And so our call to action, you can sign the petition for Robert's exoneration, and you see it on the screen at change.org/free Robert Hines, and demand accountability from our elected officials. If you have a legal or community resource and would like to join the advocacy team for Robert or be part of the work that A Life for a Life Urban Initiative is doing, email RT secondchance@gmail.com. Or 3, you can make a donation to Robert's Legal Fund at gofundme.com/freeroberthines or Cash App or RT Second Chance. No donation is too small. And I want to really reiterate that. If it's $1 or $5, it adds up. And lastly, I want to say to everyone, we have a November election that's coming up. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to go vote. This is an issue of an executive issue, it's a legislative issue, and it is a judiciary issue. If you do not know who your representatives are, if you do not know who your senators are, find out and go vote. When you go to the polls and you see the judicial candidates on the polls and the prosecutorial candidates, make sure you have research records. Find out what their positions have been on in the criminal cases, of what their records have been, instead of just going to the polls and voting for whoever's there. So let's take on that responsibility. Let's make sure that we get out, take a person, I know it's in COVID, put a mask on, wash your hands, put them in the back seat of your car, and take them to the polls and vote, or make sure that you have a mail-in ballot, walk it in, do whatever you have to do, but we have to get out and vote. I want to just remind all of you that we all have a responsibility. Robert is our brother, and he represents our nephews, our brothers, our husbands, our fathers. He represents, and Alfonso represents our family. So let's get out and let's make sure that we do what we need to do to make sure that we annihilate this issue of mass incarceration, particularly in the African American community. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank you, thank To a Life Urban Initiative for putting on this town hall meeting. And you can go back and see the results of the other meetings. I want to thank really the Hines family, and I want to thank the Clark family for being here today, and to let you know that we're continuing to pray for you, but not only pray for you, but we are putting actions behind our prayers. So we want to thank you for joining us today. God bless you.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.